Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of the Stench of Truth Radio here on Blog Talk Radio. I am, of course, your host, Ted Torbich, and my guest today joining me is Tracy R. Twyman. She is an esoteric researcher, and she has written many articles and several books, her latest of which is Money Grows on the Tree of Knowledge, which is quite a book, actually. I'm not quite finished reading that one yet, but I've read a couple of her other books, which are available on her website, quintessentialpublications.com, or you can just use tracyrtwyman.com, which will redirect you there. She has many essays that she's written. She's taken a keen interest lately in the royal wedding, which just happened, and I'm sure we'll have some time to talk about that. One thing I wanted to point out that Tracy's work spans a broad spectrum of different topics. Even in the book on money, Money Grows on the Tree of Knowledge, there is a very good primer into alchemy and the philosophy of alchemism. And you also have various other esoteric subjects that she goes into, like symbolism, symbology, and especially in this case with the wedding that just happened, a lot of mystical connections, a lot of occult connections, and she is very good at making these connections and introducing this material and making it accessible to people. And that's why she's a very popular interviewee, and you can also find many interviews with her across the internet, and she herself has done podcasts in the past, The Invisible Hand, and I think, let me see here what the other one was. She had another one as well. I'll let her tell you whenever I bring her on the line here in a moment. But the Invisible Hand podcast is one that she did. I've listened to several episodes of that. I enjoy listening to Tracy talk. As I said, she is a very knowledgeable researcher, and it's always a great boon to be able to get a woman's perspective on the occult and esoteric, because, after all, this is largely a male-dominated field of inquiry. And I think it's extremely important that the woman's point of view be given in relation to how these things are seen and understood, because oftentimes men or women solely by themselves or as a group will form particular opinions that come down as accepted wisdom, and oftentimes someone from the other will be able to open up a completely new door and perception as to what is in fact going on. So again, Tracy Twyman's website's quintessentialpublications.com or tracyrtwyman.com, and she has several books that you can purchase either as PDFs, or some of them are available as actual books as well. And some of the titles are the latest book, which is Money Grows on the Tree of Knowledge, The Merovingian Mythos and the Mystery of Rennes-le-Château, Solomon's Treasure, The Magic and Mystery of America's Money, Hocus Pocus, The Magical Power of St. Peter, Mind-Controlled Sex Slaves and the CIA, Dead But Dreaming, The Great Old Ones of Lovecraftian Legend Reinterpreted as Atlantean Kings. That's really good. I read that last week. The Choice Vine, Mary Magdalene, The Sacred Whore and the Benjamite Inheritance. The Judas Goat, The Substitution Theory of the Crucifixion. The Cutting of the Orm, The Secret Calendar of the Priory of Sion. The Arcadian Mystique, the best of Dagobert's Revenge magazine, and she, of course, is known for Dagobert's Revenge magazine, and she has a couple copies of those left that you can get as well if you're interested. And you can find a couple of other books on our website as well, so I encourage you to check that out. So without any further ado, I'm going to bring Tracy R. Twyman onto the line. Tracy, are you with us?
I'm right here. Thank you. Thank you for that lovely introduction.
Oh, you're quite welcome. I'm very pleased to have you on the show today. And, well, I guess, obviously we want to talk about a lot of different topics, but I think we probably should start off with the royal wedding. And I see that you're going to be offering for sale a new book on your website that goes into some of the aspects of the royal wedding.
Yeah, well, I've been covering it for a couple of weeks now on my blogs. I've got tracyrtwyman.com and libertycappress.com, and for the most part, the same material is on both sites. But at any rate, and then I've got this book coming out with Clyde Lewis coming out May 2nd, and it's called Antichrist 2012, Will Prince William Be the King of the World? Now, I am not making predictions about who the Antichrist is, or if there is such a thing necessarily. Right. And then I'm certainly not making any apocalyptic predictions necessarily about 2012. What we're doing is we're analyzing symbolism, which is normally what we do, and it's amazing. You can get so much out of that. That's how I approach everything. That's why it seems like I've covered such a broad range of topics, as you were describing in your introduction. But really, there's a thread of connection between all of them, and it is a hermetic, alchemical thread of symbolism and mythology that runs through everything, including current events and economics. So, yeah, I looked at the royal wedding, and this is the sort of thing where I was going to cover this, I guess, for Clyde Lewis's radio show, because he's got this theory about Prince William being the Antichrist that he's been doing presentations on for a while now. And apparently a little bit of it is based on research I did in the past for Dagobah's Revenge magazine. He used to be a big fan of that. And, of course, in that magazine I used to always write about royal bloodlines, and the ones that allegedly are connected to Jesus and Mary Magdalene, the supposed Grail bloodline of the Stuart kings of Scotland and the Merovingian kings of France. And then, beyond that, also the traditions of all of these royal families going back to the beginning of history, where, like, say, for instance, in ancient Mesopotamia, they said that their original kings came from heaven, that they were gods that had mated with humans, and that's how their royal bloodline got started. So I've been, throughout my life, analyzing the origin of kingship in heaven, really, from divine beings, or at least that's what the mythology says. And, I guess inspired Clyde to think that Prince William might be the Antichrist, because, after all, Prince William is I suppose he's a greater heir to this Grail bloodline than Queen Elizabeth or any of his ancestors to that throne. He's got actually more direct connections, not only to Jesus and Mary Magdalene, but to every major monarch in Europe. He's got more direct blood going back to those than his mother or who preceded her uncle on the throne. So I'm saying that Prince William is going to be one of the most qualified kings of England, as well as potential claimants to other thrones throughout Europe that we've ever had. So
that would be according to their bloodline dynasty, is what you're saying, because he has a greater degree of all of the ancient bloodlines in him than the other people, like Charles, for instance, or because, and this is probably because Diana herself, his mother, is like a separate descendant. So it sort of brings together two different aspects of that into one person.
Exactly. You have the House of Windsor, which is really sort of it's been renamed in the last recent years, and it's basically called the House of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha, or Coburg-Gotha. At any rate, it's of originally Prussian descent, and they, usurped as kings often do. So, people who are into royal bloodlines, and there are quite a number of people who still care about who's the rightful heir to what throne, and a lot of people consider themselves to be claimants, or interested in thinking about it anyway. And there's a lot of controversy about who should be the rightful heir to what throne, or even, dukedoms and baronies and things like that. Well, at any rate, the throne of England, of course, it has been through several different dynasties, and so the present dynasty is imported, as were several of the others that took over. But some people have a fondness in their heart for the Stuart dynasty, which I described as coming from the Merovingian kings of France, and through that to allegedly Jesus and Mary Magdalene, and then beyond that to the House of David, King David of Israel, and the Davidic descent of the British kings. I mean, all of these, you have to understand this, all of these bloodlines in England are related, all of these royal bloodlines. I mean, they all intermarry within one another. You're always trying to increase the power of your own dynasty, your own kingdom, by marrying into someone else's line to the throne. So they're all related. So it's not like Queen Elizabeth doesn't have this descent. It's just that, William, through Diana Spencer and her connection to the House of Stuart, might have a more direct connection to the Jesus part than Queen Elizabeth.
Yeah, so that makes sense.
So at any rate, you've got all this interesting descent in Prince William's blood, where he might be, like I said, a claimant to other thrones beyond just that of England. And, it also seems like he's someone who's kind of being looked at to rescue the monarchy. It's been in disrepair for a long time. Pretty much ever since, Queen Elizabeth's uncle abdicated because he wanted to marry a commoner. That's how she got on the throne. Then, of course, while she's been on the throne, she's lost the empire that the son supposedly never set on. She, one by one, ceded all of those territories that they had conquered, and now they're independent. And so, the monarchy has lost a lot of power.
Some might argue that. Some might argue that point as to whether they're in fact independent at all.
Sure. But I'm saying that the overt rule of the Queen over her domains, and in fact the overt rule of the UK over those territories that they used to hold, is just so much less than it used to be. And in the public's eyes now, they look at the monarchy as being a joke, and outside of England it's a joke and kind of funny and cute and quaint. And then even in England, they still kind of think, of it as a team mascot or something. It's something to be proud of, to represent your national heritage. But they don't expect these people to ever really do anything other than prance around in fancy clothes. And, the thing is, though, that the Queen never really did give up her power, and she may choose to sort of take a back pedal to Parliament, but that doesn't mean Prince Charles has to do that if he takes the throne over for her. Or, Prince William, supposedly, according to documents that have been leaked from the palace and were printed by the Daily Mail, they have already agreed to make Prince William shadow king. They've agreed to basically skip Charles, so that Prince William's already learning some of the duties, I guess, of being king, and actually exercising some of them. So he's doing a little bit of the paperwork that they do, and just getting ready for some of the ceremonial stuff he's going to have to do. So, anyway, I'm saying that they're setting up William to be king and to bypass Charles, and that could happen in so many ways. You know, they could. The Queen herself pressures her family members into doing what she wants to, you know, what she thinks will represent the monarchy the best. So she decided to let William marry this commoner, supposedly Kate Middleton.
Right.
And this is after she's already. One of the things she's known for was her sister tried to marry a commoner, tried to get divorced and marry a commoner. And she wouldn't have it, and she forced this woman, her sister, to basically give up the man that she loved and just live alone for the rest of her life in loneliness and misery, because the Queen just didn't think that was proper. Well, and then she was also very upset about Princess Diana and Prince Charles's relationship. Obviously, was just a big embarrassment for everyone.
Yeah.
And of course, some people think that she had Princess Diana killed. So the Queen is like always getting involved in people's relationships. So it's very weird to me that she's just like, okay, yeah, I like Kate Middleton, let's have her. Because supposedly Kate Middleton doesn't have any royal blood, and I've looked at the genealogy they've trotted out, which I guess came out a few days ago. Really, the press hadn't looked into her background before then. And, yeah, they're all, like, business owners and workers. There's no royal blood in there as far as I can tell so far. But one of the interesting things they brought out is that she's got these, you know, they looked at all of the ancestry of the two people and compared them generation by generation. This is in the papers just a few days ago. And the point of the article was to say, hey, look, you know, each one of his ancestors is a monarch or, you know, some royal person. And then each one of her ancestors was someone, you know, workaday. But what was really weird was that I believe it was the great-grandfather generation for both of them. They compared the photos of the two people. And they were almost identical. They looked very, very similar, and they remarked on that in the newspaper, in The Guardian. So I guess what I'm saying is that, you know, I really wouldn't be surprised if it comes out that, you know, she's got some royal connections she didn't even realize, because that's what turns out to be the case so often. I've written about this in the past, but so many other people have recently, too. They've written about the fact that people in positions of power in the United States, in Europe, in supposedly elected positions, end up coming from these same bloodlines. And all of the presidents can be traced back to Henry II and William the Conqueror of England directly. And then they can all be connected to one another.
Yeah.
So, you know, these families are not insignificant, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yes, it's all very true. And, of course, you bring up a very good point about William, and they're setting him up to be king. I mean, after all, Charles's oafish bumbling, I guess, is enough to turn anybody off. But you also bring up a good point about the idea of William possibly having some legitimacy to other thrones, because as you rightly point out, and everybody should know, that all of the royalty around the world have always inbred with one another. And you can find that with every elite group of people. You had Charles Darwin and the Huxleys and the Galtons and all those people all interbreeding with one another in an effort to try and get a better stock of people. And I think any elite group around the world tends to have this ideology where they intermarry amongst one another because they think they're superior or of better blood lineage, etc., and they want to purify that in some sense by their children. And the fact that William might have a legitimate claim to other thrones around the world could certainly lend credence to the idea that he could fit the bill for an Antichrist-type figure who is, after all, supposed to be the leader of the world.
And then there's also things having to do with the symbolism of today and the floor that the ceremony took place on. First, I'll go into the floor, just because that's easy. I discovered this just a few days ago because my husband was watching some show called Time Team. It's a BBC documentary show about archaeology. And so this episode was a couple years old that he was watching. But what it was about was this restoration project that's been going on at Westminster Abbey, where they discovered the floor, the real coronation floor on which kings were supposed to be crowned. I mean, it's the same floor that kings have always been crowned on. They've always been crowned on this one particular spot on the floor in Westminster Abbey. And for the last 150 years or so, until a couple years ago, that floor was covered with a carpet. So people didn't really know what was underneath it. So they brought up the carpet again for some reason a couple of years ago, and it was like all of a sudden they rediscovered this pattern on the floor. There's this mosaic tiling that's been placed there since Henry II, I believe, 13th century, and it's called the Cosmati pavement. It's all these, they brought in all these stones from Egypt and Greece, and they just made this amazing mosaic, I guess you would call it, a pattern with different swirly shapes and globes, but it's all meant to represent the universe, the cosmos, with the globe in the center. There's this pink sphere in the middle that represents the primum mobile, the whole Earth, and then the cosmos, really, and then the center of it, the place that it came from and will return someday, the glob of chaos that creation was allegedly created by God.
Or the primordial mound, as it were, like in Egyptian mythology, yeah.
So, and it's like they're really, when they created this thing, they were really getting to the root heart of the concept of sacred kingship, with the king representing the Lord of the earth, this primordial archetype concept that I've written about so many times of the primordial king. And I'm writing about this in depth in a new book that'll be coming out in the summer. The primordial king really was King Saturn or Kronos of the golden age of mythology.
Well, you have some of Kronos. You have a bit of Kronos in your book, Money Grows on the Tree of Knowledge.
That's right. Yeah. So
yeah.
I'm going to just briefly touch upon it right here, so I can talk about the Cosmati pavement. I really want to get into Kronos a little
I
more
just wanted to mention that there's a lot of Kronos cropping up in that book. So it's apparent that Kronos is a very important figure in ancient mythology. There's no question about it.
Yeah. Basically, the primordial king before there were humans even. The first king on Earth was Kronos and was remembered as the Lord of the Earth and the Lord of Time and the beginning and the end. And it's like the theory goes that, before the world as we know it, there was this golden age with King Saturn ruling over it, and no one had to work or anything. It was this beautiful paradisal realm where everyone had everything that they wanted, and there was no death, just like the Garden of Eden. And then, I won't get into it too much, but something changed, and so we have our own reality now that we all know. But someday we're going to come into this new golden age that some human is going to occupy that throne of Saturn again and be his avatar, his living embodiment on Earth, and rebuild that kingdom. So we're going to have a new golden age at some point in the future, is the way the myths and the prophecy goes. And so you have this symbolism in Westminster Abbey of where the king is crowned, pointing to this concept of the Lord of the Earth. And beyond that, really touching on the apocalyptic nature of that concept, too, because Saturn is, of course, the Lord of the beginning and the end, as I said, the Alpha and Omega. And on the Cosmati pavement, you have this Latin inscription that's written in code. It's a riddle, and what it comes out to is it's predicting the day that the world will end. So it says that, well, the world is going to last for 19,638 years. And it calculates that according to, the way the riddle goes is it tells you the ages of a bunch of different animals, how long they're going to live, their lifespan. And it does this in progression from rats, I believe, and then it goes up to cats and dogs and horses and then humans. And, of course, you're getting progressively longer lifespans, and you're supposed to take the number of that lifespan and multiply it by 3 and then add it to the other ones. And then the last set is you're supposed to add in the lifespans of 3 sea serpents, and they specified the length of time that sea serpents live. And so the way it comes out is the lifespan of the Earth is the length of 3 sea serpents. So at any rate, there's a lot of analysis that could be done and to see, when is it predicting the end of the world, or is it now, and does it have anything to do with 2012? And I kind of think it's like staring into clouds at this point. I could make all sorts of things out of it.
Right.
But the important point is that this pavement has been revealed for the first time in 150 years and is going to be used when the next king is crowned. But not only that, it was used today, because the wedding took place on top of this pavement. You could see it the entire time. And so that was very interesting. It's the way I see it, it has an apocalyptic message, and it's predicting when you're standing on top of this, it's like you're embodying that concept of the Lord of the Earth. But in addition to the floor that the wedding took place on, there was, of course, a lot of other aspects to the wedding that were very interesting. So this is what I've been talking about on other radio shows for the last couple of weeks, and this is what I've been writing articles about on Liberty Cat Press. Been writing about the fact that the date of this wedding corresponds to a pagan festival of Walpurgis Night and May Day. And it was a fertility ritual in the past, and is specifically linked to this concept of royalty as being an embodiment of divinity. And so the way that the May Day ritual used to be played is that the king and the queen of the land would ritually embody the king and queen of the ancient world, or the god and goddess of the ancient world, both king and queen and god and goddess. So they had the same connotation in the ancient world. And the king, kind of gets his legitimacy from his symbolic marriage to the queen or the goddess of the other world. So, in other words, that was Diana to the ancients. It was, goddess Diana, also known as, she represented so many other goddess figures, but really, she was
Ishtar, Isis, that sort of thing.
Yeah, in the context of this May Day ritual, she was the virgin queen goddess of the underworld and of heaven. And basically in the ritual, the king and queen are taking on ritually Diana. The queen is becoming the goddess Diana, and the king is becoming Saturn or Jupiter, depending on what reference you follow. So he's embodying the Lord of the Earth, and in the May Day ritual, they call him the King of the Wood. Now, from what I was reading in this anthropology book, the classic anthropology book, The Golden Bough, by Sir James Fraser, which also is one of Prince Charles's favorite books. So this is the royal family's reading from this very same playbook that I'm reading from. He says that, originally May Day ritual was a royal fertility festival in which the king and queen were literally playing out the parts of the king of the wood and the queen of May, as they called it in the ritual. But they were embodying this god and goddess. And they would have a sex rite where they, it was like a sacred marriage, the Hyros Gamos. They were embodying these gods and having sex with one another. And then at the end of the festivities, the king would be sacrificed. And then as this ritual progressed through history and morphed, it was the part of the king and queen of May was played by commoners. And in each village, they would elect a king and queen of May. And then they would still play out the same role, though. They would have fertility rituals, sex rituals, and then they would sacrifice the temporary king at the end of it. So this is what May Day is all about.
Sacrifice.
And sacrifice and fertility rituals and the marriage of the king and queen of heaven, the king and queen of the world. And then this imagery of Diana as being this virgin queen goddess. Now, let's look at some of the aspects of not only the date that they chose to get married on, but also dates that are significant in Kate Middleton's life. Okay. The wedding's taking place on April 29th, which is, like I said, the day before Walpurgis Night and the 2 days before May Day. But it is the day of the feast day of St. Catherine, who Catherine Middleton is named after. Now, the feast of St. Catherine, okay, here's what St. Catherine's all about. She was famous for her mystic marriage to Jesus. She was a virgin. She had a vision in which she felt that she was literally married to Christ, and he put a ring on her finger and put a crown on her head and called her his queen. So here we have, the imagery of St. Catherine being evoked on the day by choosing this wedding day, and of course it's her name. She's named after St. Catherine. You have the imagery of St. Catherine, the Virgin Queen, being evoked right there. You also have in Kate Middleton's middle name Elizabeth the same imagery, because Queen Elizabeth of England was the first. Queen Elizabeth I was the Virgin Queen. That's what she called herself. She modeled herself after the Virgin Mary. In her own imagery, the clothes that she would wear, the makeup she would wear, she would paint her face all white, and she just looked freakish. But,
yes, she did.
Trying to embody this archetype of the Queen of Heaven and the Virgin Queen. And then you also have a reference to that with Kate Middleton's birth date of January 9th, which is the feast day of Saint Basilisa. Now, Basil means king, so we've got Basilisa, it kind of means queen, but it also, the Lisa part, the name Lisa comes from Elizabeth, so it's kind of like Saint Basilisa, her name is almost saying Queen Elizabeth. It's very strange. But her story is that she also was virginal and remained virginal after her wedding date, convinced her husband to remain virginal, and they both went to a martyr's death after that. So once again, you have Virgin Queen imagery with the birth date of Kate Middleton. And then finally, you've got May Day itself, which is celebrated by the Catholic Church as the day in which the Virgin Mary is crowned as the Queen of the May. So they put the Virgin Mary in this slot where the goddess Diana should go.
Yes. Which
the Catholic Church always, sort of, their saints are always modeled after, gods of the ancient world and sort of take over the same role as those gods.
Indeed, they do.
But you've got all this stuff going on, and of course you've got the implied presence of Princess Diana herself in the wedding, because the engagement ring that William gave Kate is in fact the same ring that Princess Diana was given by Charles. So and then there were some other things, like they visited her grave a couple days before the wedding, and, they're very much making her a part of the wedding. And in the imagery that I'm analyzing, I'm saying, hey, it's kind of like he's marrying his mother, because he's marrying his mother was for sure the real, literal embodiment almost of goddess Diana archetype, and now he's, sort of ritually making his wife the new Diana. And which it fits in exactly with the symbolism I'm analyzing, because I'm taking it to a further level, and I'm saying, look also at these other myths about the king marrying this goddess of the underworld. What are some other stories about that? And what it says really is that the stories that I'm talking about the Lilith archetype. You see this in Jewish folklore, but then actually the same pattern can be found in mythology all over the place. And one of the instances I wrote about in one of my articles was going all the way back to Sumeria with the goddess Inanna. And the point is that the archetype basically says the king, and in some stories it's just a regular guy, but this dude gets seduced by Lilith, by the queen of the underworld, who the origin of her mythology really is that she was Adam's first wife before Eve, and then she sort of got dismissed, and her bloodline, her children were swept under the rug, and they didn't get their inheritance that she felt was entitled to them. So the mythology is that Lilith is always trying to inject her bloodline back on Earth, and especially in royal bloodlines, so that she can get her children back in the line of inheritance that Adam's children are going to inherit. So the myth is that a guy is about to get married, and before the ceremony happens, he accidentally somehow gets co-opted into marrying Lilith, the queen of the underworld. And he doesn't realize he's been tricked until the end, and then it's too late, and he's trapped in this contract with her. And what ends up happening is he has to share himself half the time with his underworld wife, and then half the time with his earth wife. So I was saying, look at this reference is embedded in this wedding too, because you've got William marrying Kate Middleton, but he's always also marrying his mother, who's this goddess archetype. It's kind of like he's got two brides, and one of them is this Lilith character, or as I refer to it also, it's the corpse bride archetype. In fact, Tim Burton made a movie called The Corpse Bride, and if you watch that movie, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. He tells the story that I'm butchering here of this marriage to the goddess of the underworld.
Well, I think what you're saying,
in a long-winded fashion, that's what's going on with the wedding.
Are you saying that in this case that Princess Diana herself, being that she is in the underworld, so to speak, would represent the corpse bride in this particular arrangement that's going on here?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's like he was already married to her, and now he's got to marry this other girl too, but his loyalty is to the goddess, really, and his earth bride is just someone, it's just the other person he's there to breed with. The way I really went in depth analyzing that ritual, that concept, and applying it to the Mayday ritual, where I was basically saying, maybe this is what the whole virgin queen concept really points to, because it's kind of weird, isn't it? If Diana is the bride in this wedding, this fertility ritual, this highly sexual fertility ritual, how can you call her a virgin, so that's what the goddess Diana was said to be. She supposedly didn't ever want to get married and would kill anyone who tried to woo her. But then you have this ceremony that would take place every year in which her marriage would be celebrated, and people would have sex in her honor. So why is she remembered as Virgin Queen, and why do we have this imagery where they're trying to point out some sort of dualistic concept, the married virgin, it's like, I think it's like combining the concept of the virgin, the queen of heaven, like the Virgin Mary.
Yes.
With the Queen of Harlots, really, the Whore of Babylon concept.
Yes.
I
can see that.
The Inanna, goddess of Sumeria that I mentioned before, I mean, you can really look at her as one of the main archetypes that all the goddess figures were based on later. And when you look at her story, that's when you can really sort of understand this dualism, because she was remembered as being Queen of Harlots. She had many different suitors. That's why, I think that's one of the reasons why when you look at mythology, you see this one goddess. It seems like all the different goddesses are really the same goddess when you look at their stories. And then they're the consorts of all these different gods. And you're like, what? She really gets around. She sleeps with all these different guys? Is she married all of them? Yes, that's the way the story of Inanna was that, yeah, she was sleeping with all these different guys. She didn't want to be tied down. So it's like Diana didn't want to get married. Inanna doesn't want to get married either, but it's not because she's virginal. It's because she doesn't want to be tied down to marriage. So I think that those concepts are primordially connected. Now, Inanna, one of the things in her story is that she, at one point, journeyed to the underworld for a time and was dead, and she was there visiting her sister, who's the underworld queen, Ereshkigal, which is the origin of the Lilith myth. In fact, Ereshkigal's other name is Luluwa, which is what Lilith comes from. So Inanna had to go down to the underworld, and she died, and her sister held her for ransom, said that if you want to leave the underworld and go back to the land of living, you have to find someone to replace you. So who did she choose but her own husband, who was this figure Dumuzi, that the king of the world, the king of the wood concept is based on, this wild man, this green man, a guy who was basically raised in the forest, and it was sort of like this like St. John the Baptist kind of, just a man who lived out in the wilderness, and she married him, and or not married, but she was his consort. Sorry. Mm-hmm. And at a certain point, I guess she decided that she wanted him to replace her in the underworld because she felt like he wasn't mourning properly while she was dead. He wasn't showing her the proper respect. So, at any rate, that's what happened. He ended up replacing her in the underworld. And that's where you get this idea of, and it's throughout mythology, that the queen of the underworld sacrifices her own son, has sex with her own son, and then sacrifices her own son. Because it turns out Dumuzi was her own child. So, and that's the archetype. Like I said, it's throughout mythology. It comes up over and over again that the main goddess, queen of the ancient world, she would marry her own son and then tire of him and kill him, or have sex with her own son and turn him into her holy consort, and then kill him later, and then act like it wasn't her fault. And so you have this ritual of the weeping for Tammuz, this ritual where supposedly the king, like the solar king of Christmas, he dies, and the goddess says that everyone needs to mourn him. Well, it's like that whole ritual was created to sort of cover up the fact that she was really responsible for his death. So, and that's what this whole ritual of the temporary kings is about. That, why is the king killed at May Day? It's because they're reenacting that same original sacrifice of the goddess's son. So, just one more thing. The reason, I guess I started out saying this, the reason why the virgin idea is being applied to Diana, the queen of the underworld, I think, is because when you're involved in this Hieros Gamos ritual, if you're the king evoking the goddess into your wife and then having a fertility ritual, having sex with her, then it's like, yeah, you're having sex with your wife, but you're really having sex with the goddess, but she's not alive. She's not physically incarnate. So she's not defiled by the sexuality, you know. And this is what I think is going on with the Virgin Mary story and all of these stories of the Virgin Goddess. It's not that she's not having sex. It's not that she's not breeding. It's that she's not being touched by the defilement of it because she's not literally alive.
She's just a spiritual, piggybacker, sort of.
Right, which is why the images of the goddess in the underworld, in the myths, it's usually she's presented as being in a death-like sleep. And like, say, for instance, there's a story of Venus in the Venusberg, where supposedly there's this mountain at the center of the earth, and within that mountain is a cave where there's this secret tomb Venus. And if people stumble upon it, then they will be cursed and forced to live in there with her. If they stumble upon her body laying naked in repose. And so, she's like in the center of the earth, basically. The goddess is lying asleep, and her body looks perfectly preserved, like it hasn't decayed at all.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is something that, you know, when they would, mummify saints, really, when they would decide to preserve a saint's body for display, they could do it in such a way that it looked like it didn't corrupt at all. And that was seen in ye olden times, hundreds of years ago, as a sign that the corpse of that saint was pure and virginal. That's the reason why it didn't corrupt. People didn't understand that, embalming techniques were being used. So,
of course.
I'm just saying that sort of idea is being applied to this concept of Lilith and the corpse bride. That's why she's virginal, is not really that she is. It's this image of her body lying perfectly preserved in repose.
That makes sense.
Yeah. And okay, so just one more thing, I guess I need to mention about the wedding, and we will have mentioned most of the main points about that. There's this cake that they consumed, that William consumed at the reception, and that was different because normally, you've got the wedding cake that all the wedding party consumes, and there's a whole tradition about it in the British monarchy, where it's supposed to be a white cake with a certain kind of fruit in the middle. Well, William decided to break with tradition, and instead he decided he would have his own cake served just to him. It is the secret family recipe. It's made of dark chocolate and tea biscuits. Well, what makes this significant is that during the May Day rituals, the way they would, draw lots to choose the May King, the one to be sacrificed, what they would do is they would bake a cake and then cut it up into pieces and take one of the pieces and stick it in the fire to char it so that it was black all the way around. And then they would hand these pieces of cake out, and the guy who got the blackened cake is the one that was chosen to be king and chosen to be sacrificed. So here you have William choosing to reenact that imagery by serving himself his own black cake. So I don't know what it means, but it seems like all of this stuff has been embedded, perhaps consciously, and there may be a little bit of unconscious coincidence happening here too. But like I've said before, the royal family, their whole existence is ritual. So and they are very mystically minded, especially Prince Charles. And I wouldn't put it past them at all to choose all of these things, including choosing a bride who was born on a significant day.
Mm-hmm. I would think that's probably more likely that what you're dealing with is much more overt rather than it is subconscious, because the imagery that you bring up and the importance of it in the ritual aspects of the wedding and what we see with the images coming out of there certainly lends credence to the idea far beyond coincidence or even subconscious implanting of this stuff, that instead it was planned. And I think that maybe if I could just take a little leap here, perhaps what William was doing with the cake was in effect saying that I am going to make myself king by doing this.
Yes. Yes, exactly.
It was like a conscious...
Right.
It was a conscious decision on his part to say, I'm going to have this ritual, I'm going to use this mystical imagery to show that I am actually taking my destiny into my own hands and I'm going to reach out and become king myself.
Yeah, and accept the consequences of that too. If someone seeks out the kingship, they're also seeking out their own demise in the end. They're going to be sacrificed to the goddess, which I thought was interesting during the wedding homily. I don't know, was this during the homily or was this during the ceremony itself when they were being wed? I don't want to misquote it. It was either the Archbishop of Canterbury or who did the wedding itself, or then the guy who did the homily afterwards. One of them said, "Present your bodies as a living sacrifice." It was a quote from Romans 12. And then they also said, every wedding is a royal wedding with every bride and groom the king and queen of creation. So they're definitely, they're saying, hey, this ritual is for everyone. When you are watching this, it's like you're watching your own wedding. When you participate in your own wedding, it's like you are the king and the queen. I think they were drawing parallels between the audience, the people of the kingdom, and what was happening with their future king and queen on stage there. They were saying, there's an inextractable link between these things. These things are connected,
Well, I guess that's why marriage itself as a ritual certainly is ancient, and certainly it has a mythological motif surrounding it for sure. So obviously the all the mystical angles that are associated with just the act of marriage itself would certainly be broadcast there as well, I'm sure, and brought back up and made important.
And also, I shouldn't neglect to mention the concept of alchemical marriage was embodied in this ceremony. And just to sort of, I guess, put that lightly, some way to shorten it up, I'll just say that in alchemy, you've got forces of the universe represented as metals in some cases, in various allegories, and then as a king and queen at a wedding. And in the allegory, they basically describe how this king and queen are described as the red king and the white queen. They get married, and because they represent these opposites of the universe, they annihilate one another. That's the chemical wedding. And then something new is born of that. And there's this story about this whole concept written in allegory, I would say in the 17th century, The Chemical Wedding of Christian Rosenkreuz, written by Johann Valentin André. And the whole concept of the Rosicrucian Brotherhood, really, this is one of the books that sort of sparked the idea that there is a secret underground Rosicrucian Brotherhood, with the existence of this book that was published. But the story of the Chemical Wedding of Christian Rosenkreuz tells the story of this marriage of the king and the queen. And interestingly, it takes place on Easter in that story, which was just earlier in the week.
Yes.
So, but they were wearing in the wedding today. They were wearing those costumes. Of course, the bride was in white, which is not unusual, but the king was wearing a red jacket. So it all just fit in perfectly. It was kind of moving in a way. It was strange. Like I have no emotional connection to all this stuff, and the wedding itself was somewhat dispassionate in terms of, there was no bride kissing at the wedding itself, And then afterwards, there was this balcony kiss that was just so dispassionate and awkward, really. But the ceremony itself and the way it embodied all of these alchemical archetypes, I really just found it kind of amazing to watch, and I really enjoyed it, actually.
One of the people in my chat room wanted to know if the cake that they consumed had gold flake on it.
I don't know.
That might be an interesting. That might be an interesting alchemical angle there if it did, because sometimes they do use that gold flake in making these sorts of things.
Well, I don't want to branch off too much, but talking about the ingredients in the cake, it makes me want to also talk about one of the other cake rituals that I've written about recently. It takes place on St. Basil's Day, which is like the male equivalent almost of that St. Basilisa that I was talking about.
Yeah.
These Catholic saints, they the feast day that they're chosen for is always corresponds to the pagan feast day of a god or goddess in the ancient world, and some other concept that they want to embody with the saint. So it's absolutely worth it if you want to know the esoteric meaning of a Catholic saint day. Just look at the story of the saint, look at the name, look at what the significance of the date was in the pagan world, and you'll find there's a pattern that connects all those things. Because for the most part, these saints, their stories are complete fiction and tradition. And a lot of the same stories are attributed to different saints, so it's completely made up. It's all about representing these concepts, these archetypes. The story of St. Basil is one in which he was, well, I don't want to tell the story. It's complicated and annoying, but let's look at his name. He was his name means king, and his feast day would be celebrated on New Year's Day, actually. And I wrote an article that was all about these similar rituals that take place either any time between Christmas and about 9 days after the New Year. There's this whole festival of Saturnalia, really. It's a festival celebrating King Saturn, and this is what our Christmas ritual is based on. I mean, this is exactly where it comes from. The way that that this would be celebrated in the past is that a temporary king again, would be elected to represent Saturn, and then sacrificed at the end. Now, the way that they would choose them, again, was with cakes. So they would bake a cake and cut it into slices, but within one of the slices there would be a token representing a baby. And whoever got that slice of cake with the little baby token inside of it was the king for Saturnalia, and then they would get sacrificed. Now, this ritual is reenacted in modern times. There's the feast day of St. Basil, which they celebrate in Europe, Eastern Europe largely, where they do the same thing. They cut up this cake, and whoever gets the token is the king, and then they're sort of celebrated for the length of the party, and then at the end they're supposed to be the one to clean up, or they have to pay for the next year's party, and so that's your punishment. That kind of represents the same concept as the actual sacrifice of the king in the earlier versions of the rituals. And we do this at Mardi Gras. We have the same rituals. It's called King's Pie there.
Oh, indeed. Yes, we do. Yeah.
Okay, so anyway, that's what I'm saying, that this whole thing about the cake, cutting up the cake, serving one of the special pieces to the person who's destined to be the king and get sacrificed, it's all connected to this concept of King Saturn. And the reason why there's a baby token inside of the cake is that that's what Saturn was known for, is sacrificing his own children by eating them. Because back in the Golden Age, in order for him to maintain his throne, he had to make sure that none of his children ever grew up to usurp him. There was a prophecy that that's exactly what was going to happen. So he was swallowing his children as soon as they came out of the womb. And then the story goes that his mother, or his wife, Rhea, didn't like losing all of her children and decided to save one. And so that was Zeus, and she took him to the island of Crete and, dropped him off there. He was raised by a goat. And then he grew up and did, in fact, usurp his father, castrated him, and stuck him in the center of the earth in a prison where he now lives in a death-like sleep. His dreams are supposedly influencing the people on planet Earth, and he's got followers, and he's trying to influence them through dreams. I mean, these are all the stories of King Saturn, but the interesting thing, is this concept that in order to maintain his rule that was supposedly so wonderful, that everyone was living in this paradisal realm, well, the only way he was able to maintain that was by sacrificing his children. And that is a theme that I wrote about extensively in the Money Grows on the Tree of Knowledge, and I've also written about it in some articles that you can find on my website. It's called Regnum in Potentia. It's an essay series. We've got 2 essays so far in the series, and it's all about this concept that kingship really, comes from this King Saturn archetype, and it embedded in the very archetype of kingship and leadership is the idea that you have to sacrifice your own children. That's what empires are built upon.
So many connections to so many different things that.
Yes.
Obviously, you touched upon the idea of Diana being at the center of the earth, and you also have Saturn being at the center of the earth. That's shades of Lovecraft and the dead but dreaming gods, the old gods who will return one day, which you wrote about in another one of your books, and also the idea of the Saturnalia itself as being a sort of replay of the Golden Age by which people pretty much revel around, and this of course is reflected in Lovecraft's writings again with the time of the reemergence of the old ones, whenever men will be free to run wild on the earth and understand the freedom that comes from no worries and no wants and all this sort of thing. And what's interesting to me, and I want to ask you a couple questions about what we've discussed so far, just to put things in a kind of perspective. One, when you talk about the goddess and her not wanting to be married, it made me think that what we're talking about here is a symbolism of the original goddess who does not want to be subsumed under man and wants to retain her divinity and her original place of being the sacred feminine. And so by not being married, she retains her freedom and is in fact always the goddess and never subsumed under the man, because as we've had throughout the ages, of course, as a lot of anthropologists believe, there originally was a mother goddess who was the god that people pretty much looked up to in the ancient world, and what we've had throughout civilized history basically is a male-dominated situation where you have gods that are male and you have kings that are male and you have a male patriarchal system. Would that be true?
Yes, absolutely. A good resource, not only my own writings, of course, but also the work of, she called herself Merlin Stone. She's really sort of the founder of this whole, sacred feminine revival cult, and she had a really good book called When God Was a Woman, but she goes into all of this stuff. She was really one of the first people to reinterpret ancient mythology and say this goddess that everyone seems to treat as sort of an appendage to the gods of the ancient world is it was, in fact, the original God. And she made a very good case for it. And then she has this weird interpretation of it as being good, that the matriarchal culture was the good culture, and unfortunately this patriarchal culture took over, and we need to get back to the sacred feminine, which is the message of the modern feminist movement, and so many people who are into like the Da Vinci Code and stuff, that's their obsession. They're obsessed with Mary Magdalene as being a representation of the sacred feminine. But what I found when I read Merlin Stone's book was what was disturbing about it was the sort of immoral stance that she takes, or morally ambivalent, I guess you would say. She goes into the fact that this goddess would repeatedly, murder her own children and her consorts, and she just sort of acts like that's, no big deal. And then she goes on and on about how, the whole matriarchal culture was taken over by what she refers to. She, believes in the Aryan invasion theory, that there were these, people from the Indus Valley and places like that sort of took over the ancient matriarchal cultures and killed all the queen goddess women of the ancient world, and took over and instituted a patriarchal royal system, whereas she was saying that before the patriarchal culture you had bloodline descent being important, but it was your descent from the goddess that was important. So at any rate, she believes that this oppressive patriarchal culture took over from the wonderful matriarchal culture of the ancient world. And I just think it's strange, I think that, if you want to have a value judgment, take a moral stance on what people did in the ancient world, well, it was kind of all bad.
Yes, it was.
It was all about sacrifice and killing and child abuse. And so I think it's really weird that the author of this book, celebrates that, or, there's actually a line at the end of the book where she's like, it's terrible that, children were sacrificed in the past, and we'll have to make it so that doesn't happen again. But, it's like, okay, well then, why should we judge the patriarchal culture for the fact that it has brutal origins, but then celebrate the matriarchal culture when it has equally brutal origins?
It doesn't make any sense.
Think that's right.
It doesn't make any sense. You're just trading one tyrannical, horrible system for another in that case. I mean,
right.
The goddess in that respect is not any better than the god. I mean, she's doing the same thing, basically carrying on the same traditions, and she doesn't want to have her power usurped by the men. Thus, she sacrifices her children and her consorts and or husbands, and I mean, I don't see it being any better at all. I mean, but this is the way mythology is. I mean, people look back at the past and they think everything was so rosy and wonderful back then, and a lot of people are muse about the golden age and things like this. And we see this in every mythology around the world, that in the past there was a golden age where nobody had to work and everything was just free, and like food and water and everything just flowed everywhere, and nobody had any wants or anything like this. And I think that the reality is quite the opposite. I think probably the past is extremely brutal in the history of man. And not to say that we haven't had civilizations here and there that have risen and fallen and what have you, but by and large, it's probably been rather tough slogging for humanity throughout the course of his life here on Earth, I would say. And Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well,
I was just going to say that you can understand why there would have been a brutal Aryan invasion and then just total subjugation of the females, and the institution of marriage created so that the female is always subjugated, changing the political system of choosing leadership, so that it's a patrilineal descent that's important.
Yeah.
All of this would have been done as a defense mechanism because the people who would have been, in my opinion, the male revolution that took place probably was spearheaded by children of these the original fertility rituals, where the goddess would marry a guy to represent her king, her god, but as I said, frequently would be her own son. And the fruits of these unions would sort of be wards of the temple. This is what Merlin Stone says in her book. And so you had all these sort of male sex slaves that were owned by the temples of the goddess, and they were all the children of these fertility rituals, and they were also the fodder for the sacrifices. And I think it's quite possible that really what happened is these boys who were in that position knew that they were basically there to be used as sex slaves and then slaughtered. Well, maybe they didn't want that. And
I would think so.
And as the sons of the queens or the goddess, they would have felt like, well, I'm entitled to be king too. I'm entitled to a leadership position here. My blood is sacred, just as hers is sacred. And why should I allow myself to be food for the goddess? We can turn the situation around. So I think that maybe that's what happened, is that you had a generation of men who didn't want to be sacrificed.
Yeah, I think that makes perfect
created
sense.
a whole social revolution.
Yeah, and I think that makes perfect sense. Actually, it probably is the most logical conclusion for how that particular change took place, considering the origins thereof. Just to go back a little bit, when you were talking about the various bloodlines that descend through the royal family, and I know you've done a lot of research into genealogy and bloodlines, especially royalty. Let me ask you this: Do the royals themselves actually believe that they are descendants of Jesus, or is this merely like a way for them to sort of have a measure of spiritual power with their temporal power here on Earth?
Well, I'm honestly sort of inclined to believe the conspiracy theory a little bit, the Da Vinci Code theory, about the Catholic Church trying to obfuscate this bloodline connection and basically reinterpret the myth of Jesus so that he had no ancestors because he was of this virginal birth, and he also had no heirs because he supposedly died without being married and virginal himself. So,
right.
You take the whole royal aspect out of the Messiah, the destined king of Israel, by interpreting him in that guise. So I think that I was saying this actually in Clyde Lewis's forum last night and arguing with people a little bit. Someone had called into a show and said, these monarchs, they think they're holy and they're trying to usurp the position of the church. Well, no, what really happened was the church tried to usurp the traditional position of the royal family. And this really started, again, actually, around 1200, I believe. Let's see, I need to get my dates right on this. But there was, this thing happened basically, my dates are totally wrong on that. This thing happened where it was a forgery, but it proclaimed decades, in fact, hundreds of years after the time that it supposedly occurred. But the Catholic Church made this claim that the Emperor Constantine...
That's the donation of Constantine you're talking about, right?
Yeah, the Emperor Constantine supposedly gave the entire empire over to the Catholic Church and made St. Peter's throne the throne over all of the thrones of the Roman Empire, which, the Holy Roman Empire, spanning most of what we consider Europe today. So basically that was the whole basis for this idea that the Catholic Church has the power to crown kings and the sole power. In fact, they said that a legitimate king can only reign if we crown and anoint them.
Mm-hmm.
So nowadays you have, with every anointing ceremony, you have this oil that comes from the Holy Land and has been blessed by the Pope.
Mm-hmm.
And
right.
It's really that's representational of the church trying to take over that position. They instituted this. They inserted this what was at the time artificial king crowning ceremony to put themselves in a position of power over the royal families of Europe. And so there have been, obviously there were whole wars fought, and England broke away and created their own church to get away from that hegemony. And, I think that the tension still exists, and it certainly is present in the misunderstandings that people have of the past, where people think that there's something offensive and blasphemous about a king saying that he's God, but there's nothing offensive about the church saying that they can proclaim themselves to be the arbiters of God's decisions.
Yeah, it's a dichotomy that you can't really justify. But you see the actions of this all the time. Like whenever they crown a king, it is a representative of the church that does it. Whenever you have any kind of major royal function, the church is always involved. And of course, we've had battles between church and state in that regard throughout the centuries. And there's always been a power struggle between the religious and the political. And like you said, I'm inclined to believe, as you say, that the church might have wanted to obfuscate any genealogy that could connect to Jesus by denying a bloodline descent, so that there would be no physical king on the earth that would qualify to hold the spiritual power. And that's why they have perpetrated the idea, as is outlined in Dan Brown's work and Holy Blood and Holy Grail, and other material that people have written. I certainly wouldn't think that's crazy at all. I mean, as far as looking at it from their point of view, to say that the only way that we can maintain our spiritual power is by denying the spiritual power to a living person. And how we do that is to deny that there is any descent, that a physical living person could come up and proclaim themselves to be the embodiment of spiritual force. And yet, as you observe, the church does this all the time the Pope is supposedly infallible, acting in as the voice of God, basically, from the throne in St. Peter. And I think that I guess the main thing that it comes down to is which is the more rightful position, that the spiritual aspects should be usurped by the political aspects, or the political aspects be usurped by the religious, or as I would think would be a much better result, get rid of both of them. Yeah. Basically,
because you have to accept the premise that someone else should rule over you, and then you get to argue about who that should be. And if you don't accept that premise, then you don't have to worry about that.
Because they're all elites in their own way. I mean, the church itself, they have this grand hierarchy. We're talking about Roman Catholicism, basically, because it's the largest branch of Christianity, and they have this very elaborate system of hierarchies amongst themselves, with bishops, archbishops, and cardinals, and etc., just like they do with nobility. It's the same exact thing as being an earl or a baron or a duke or whatever. You go up in the ranks, and then eventually you become pope or king, and there's basically no difference between them. It's just the basis of their power that's different. One is temporal, the other is spiritual. And I think you could draw great parallels between the two all throughout history.
Well, of course. They come from the same thing. They're basically two sides of this schism from the same origin, where the church was really an aberration in history, because before that, the church, the temple of a society, the religion of a society, was usually built around this concept that the monarch was an embodiment of the gods that you worshipped in your society. Exactly. So there was no separation between church and state, and in fact, the whole purpose really of the religion of the state was to worship the monarch and his ancestors or her ancestors as gods. And so, with the Catholic Church, all you have is someone, decided to find some way of creating their own version of that, and then try to use it to usurp all of the existing power centers on earth. And, they did a really good job of that. I mean,
yes,
we think of the Catholic Church as not having temporal power today. It just has spiritual influence. But it's also, just like the Queen of England, they are one of the richest institutions, one of the largest landowners, one of the largest holders of gold. Mm-hmm. And, of course, it's a sovereign. Vatican is a sovereign city that, they can make their own rules. The Pope can make his own rules just as the Queen can. So, yeah, it's I don't know. The whole thing about, what's better, the church or the kings, and, that I'm supposed to be upset about these monarchs usurping the position of priesthood. Well, if you really understand the origin of priesthood, you know that that's not the case at all. So,
indeed.
But like you said, in terms of what should you be for, again, that's a value judgment, I suppose. But I personally, after all the crap we've been through recently, and the absolute failure of leadership and the failure of government to be able to protect people from peril, there's just doesn't seem to be any good argument anymore to say that we need these social institutions. That's my personal opinion. Mm-hmm. And, I still like to research the origins of these concepts, but as far as what am I for, who would I prefer to rule over me, I don't care. I prefer they all go away.
Yes, I agree completely. And as far as the hierarchical structures of nobility and royalty, I have no use for them, and I also have no use for religion, and that's my own personal opinion as well. Religion is really bastardized, quite frankly, and all it does is introduce a schemata, system, or whatever of worship in between you and whatever god you choose to worship, and it seems largely irrelevant and basically a way for people to still try to maintain some kind of control over their followers, if you will.
No, I would agree with you that it's like government. Religion is someone trying to exercise their control over you, and plus none of them are accurate. They're all the claims that they make for the origin of the earth and everything are obviously erroneous, and so it's like you can't take any one of these religions seriously, in my opinion. And in my opinion, both picking a religion and picking a political ideology is like saying, I'm done thinking.
Right. That's perfect.
Take your brain out, put it in the garbage, you're done.
That's actually perfect, because it alleviates you, and that's what I've always said. It's a crutch for people. And some people need that because it's a way for them to alleviate themselves of responsibility. They let somebody else make the decisions for them. Some people like that. It's sad, really, because, I think everybody has the capability to run their life perfectly well if they just use the ability that they have. But a lot of people are afraid, and a lot of people lack the courage to do that, and they'd much rather have somebody else tell them what to do. And they fit into that category very well. And, of course, of course, our society and the institutions and everything that we've come up with has certainly bred that into people to a certain extent. And I think everybody has a little bit of that desire to just shirk their responsibility and let somebody else decide what's good for them. And sometimes it's kind of difficult to break away from that, but I think it's important for people to realize. But
well, that's largely what I wrote about in Money Grows on the Tree of Knowledge, isn't it? I sort of I'm analyzing the alchemical and hermetic and mythological origins, really, of the monetary system that we have, and then in the process, I'm really showing how we live in sort of this dreamlike, illusory world where we're being presented with all of these things that seem to us to be enduring social institutions, things that we have no power over, things that I don't know, like money and government. We all sort of allow ourselves to be subjected by those things. We are born into this, matrix-like existence with these institutions of money and government, and we just play our role in that game, and we never really think about where did those institutions come from and what do they mean? What does it mean that I'm playing this role in this particular game? And that is what I explored in that book.
Yes, and one thing that I found very fascinating, I'm glad you made the segue so we could actually talk about the book, since we were embroiled there in the royal bloodlines and what have you. One thing that I found very interesting, and I haven't finished reading the book yet, but I really enjoyed the way that you went into alchemy, the way you did, and drawing out the idea of what alchemy actually is, and what some of the allegories represent, and some of the conclusions that you brought up in the book really opened my eyes a lot of ways to illustrate exactly what it is that's happening whenever these people talk about alchemy and what it is that they're actually doing. And it puts it into a whole new light that I had not thought of before.
And then go ahead.
And now I was going to say, and then how that is like a basis for thought and philosophy of people whenever civilization, quote unquote, advanced to the point where you needed these different forms of money, like with the Templars, using their chit system, and then the rise of the banks and all this kind of thing. Just that the very basis of what alchemy represented and the what the allegories were really hinting at was just really, really interesting to me, and I had not thought of it in that way before. So.
Well, I think we've set it up well here with this whole discussion of royalty and symbolism having to do with Saturn and Saturn eating his children. All of that is in Money Grows on the Tree of Knowledge, and I make allegorical connections all over the place there with alchemy and economics. And what I'm saying, basically, I already established this idea in a previous book I wrote, Solomon's Treasure, from 2005, where I was talking about our dollar and the concept of fiat currency in general, that is paper money or money that has been just proclaimed into existence by the government as opposed to gold or silver coin. That's fiat money. And I was saying in my book that this whole system is alchemical, because what is alchemy but the turning of lead into gold, or something worthless into something valuable? And then there's also, when you examine the alchemical process, the allegorical descriptions of it, because, of course, it's almost never written out in plain English what they're even talking about.
No, it's not.
These alchemical manuscripts from, the Middle Ages, and then there's some from the Renaissance. They're all just really dense and full of symbolism. It's hard to tell what the heck they're talking about. I don't think anyone's ever accurately interpreted any of these old texts, at least no one from the outside. I think there might be secret societies that know what they mean, but at any rate, I had my own crack at it, and I think I sort of correctly figured out what they were talking about a little bit in some of those manuscripts, to an extent that I don't think anyone ever has when they're analyzing alchemy. And then I not only, did I have these revelations about what the meaning of alchemy is, but then I applied it to the economy, and I said, hey, the same thing's going on in a macroeconomic sense. So what the allegory I was talking about there is exactly what I was talking about earlier with Saturn eating his children. That is one of the central mysteries of our economic system. You've got this money being created out of nothing through what I refer to as an alchemical process, where the government is using its position, as the king, as the sovereign. Any government is really, acting as the king.
Indeed.
And they, go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying, indeed, you're right.
And so they proclaim this money into existence. That's what makes it happen. It's this magical thing where they create the money out of nothing, and then it's our belief in the money, in the power of the monarch or our government to create that money out of nothing. That's what makes it real. So that's what makes it magical, in my opinion. That's what makes it alchemical. And then, of course, I in my books I've shown how so many of the important economists and philosophers who have influenced the evolution of money have been alchemists. And I showed that the dollar sign is Hermes Caduceus. In other words, it's a symbol of alchemy also. Mm-hmm. And it's a long story. You'll have to read it all in my books, Money Grows on the Tree of Knowledge and Solomon's Treasure. But I showed that there's alchemy and money are just like two peas in a pod. They're connected from today going all the way back to ancient Sumeria, where money was invented as remember those temple fertility rituals I was talking about. Here's what it meant in ancient times during the matriarchal goddess era. They were worshiping Ishtar or Inanna in these temples, and there were these women who were themselves supposed to be embodiments of the goddess, the temple priestesses, and they sold themselves as prostitutes to the congregants, I guess. People would come, men in particular, obviously, and they would bring like a bushel of wheat to sacrifice to the temple as a donation, and then they would get this coin in exchange for that, called a shekel, and that was the first coin. And that's, even in Israel today, they call their coins shekels. They call their currency shekels. The origin of that is that these people would make a sacrifice to the temple, they'd get a coin in exchange for it, and then they could use that coin as payment to purchase prostitution services from these temple servants, these priestesses. So that's how money got invented in the first place. And then, like you mentioned, the Templars, mm-hmm. Money was basically gold and silver coin all the way up until the era of the Templars during the Crusades, when they decided to institute a checking system. They invented the checking system, and that's when the idea that you could create money out of nothing really came from. And I have actually theorized there's this whole thing about how the Templars worshipped this demon called Baphomet, and that's the reason why they were eventually disbanded and burnt at the stake. And, of course, Baphomet is like a central deity, I guess, for modern Satanists and for Freemasons and a lot of mystical groups today. But what the Templars said when they were being tortured and inquired about Baphomet, they said that Baphomet taught them wisdom and made them rich and brought fertility to their land. So whatever it is, it's this demon, that they tapped into and taught them this concept of making money out of nothing. And then they created this whole system of banks that was, they had these preceptories and all the different main stopping points on the traditional routes from Western Europe to the Holy Land. People would take pilgrimages every year. And so what the Templars would do is they would allow you to make a deposit at one of their preceptories along this pilgrimage route, and then they would give you a chit in exchange for that represented the deposit you made of gold and silver. And then you could use that chit as your checkbook, basically, as you went on your trip to the Holy Land and back. You could stop every night along the route and stay at one of these preceptories, and you would get all of your needs met by the Templars. They would put you up at one of their inns, and they would just charge you your account for all of your amenities. And so it was this great way at the time of journeying to the Holy Land and back without having to be afraid that someone was going to steal your gold. So that's how checking got started, and then it sort of snowballed from there. It evolved, and the Templars may have been doing this themselves, but we're not sure. It evolved into what is known as fractional reserve lending, which is what we have now. And it really, there was this intermediary step in which someone else also had an epiphany about creating money out of nothing. Supposedly, it was sort of developed by Jewish goldsmiths during the late Middle Ages. They, just briefly, Jews were supposed to be bankers in medieval Europe. And the reason why was because the way the monarchs, the Christian monarchs of the time viewed it, is that the Bible says that you're not supposed to lend money upon usury. You're not supposed to charge interest for a loan, that's evil. And you could be excommunicated for doing that. And so, if you have such a rule, then it's very difficult to get credit because most people don't want to loan it, right? Well,
right.
So a development was made where they basically made rules saying that Jews have to practice money lending and nothing else. They're not allowed to have any other profession. So these Jewish ghettos in Europe would become the place where all the banks were. And banks originally were mainly gold vaults. That you would have goldsmiths actually taking gold and silver coin, making the coins, making jewelry, and then they also had this function of they would hold your gold or silver for you. They would be a vault where you could make your deposit and make withdrawals from it later, and know that your gold or silver was safe in this vault. No one was going to steal it from you.
Right.
Well, the goldsmiths, some of them at some point had this stroke of genius, probably influenced by the Templars a bit, where they realized that most people who made deposits didn't, they weren't always coming to pick them up the next day. They would let them sit there for a while, and they figured out a formula about how likely it would be that someone would come and claim their gold on deposit. And it turned out that it only happened about 1 out of every 10 times. In other words, for all the gold you have on deposit, only about 1/10 of it will be called in at any given time by the people, who own it. And so what they figured out was that they could use the gold to make loans to other people and get interest back and make a profit without even telling the person whose gold was on deposit there supposedly for safekeeping that they had loaned it out. So in so doing, they created money out of nothing. They took a small amount of gold and turned it into a much larger amount of gold.
Yes,
and
indeed.
Through a sort of shell game, really. And then that got, it seems like it's a scam, but it got legitimized. And over time, that became the way that banking was done. And when the Bank of England was eventually created and then the Federal Reserve in the United States, by that time, that was the norm. And it's called fractional reserve lending now. And what they do is that they have a rule that says that a bank has to keep a certain percentage, traditionally 10%, on reserve of the deposits that are made, and then they can loan the rest of it out. And so, long story short, a lot of the money that's floating around in the global economy now, the vast majority of it has no physical backing. In other words, it's all been created out of nothing, and if you all went to your bank today and tried to claim that money that you believe is on deposit, you'll find that only a tiny fraction of it can actually be claimed. That you'll, at a certain point you won't get anything back. And in the United States, the dollar isn't convertible into anything. So if you have a run on the bank, you're screwed.
Yeah, well, we've seen that in the Depression. I mean, that's exactly what happened. You talk about a massive amount of people want to come and withdraw their funds, and of course they don't have it. They do not have all the money that they're supposed to have because of the fractional reserve lending, and we saw this played out during the Depression quite easily. And I think when you were talking about the alchemical process involved with money and the economy, I think all you have to do is look at the terminology that people use whenever they talk about the economy now. It's always about consumer confidence, and yeah, exactly. And the idea of the strength of the economy is based upon the strength of the confidence that people have in the money supply and the economy in general. So the idea that there is a faith aspect to it is probably something that a lot of people don't really think about consciously, but if you examine it, it really is the case. And there's a real close connection between the alchemical idea and the idea of ritual magic, too, as far as I'm concerned, because you have the actual creation of an item, which basically is like a magic spell that says, here is a dollar bill. You can use this to go and buy something off of somebody. It's like the creation of a magical spell through a very arcane ritual that a lot of people don't understand. I mean, the economy, it's too big. I can't understand how all that works. And that's one of the reasons why I think economics is such a really messed up so-called science, and why there are all these different schools of thought about it, because I think it's just like a giant way of obfuscating what is basically just boils down to a matter of faith. Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's not just that there's an element of economics that has to do with faith. That's what it all is about, because exactly. Yeah, if people lost their confidence in these currencies created by the government, everything would just evaporate overnight. All the money would basically not exist anymore, and everything would grind to a halt while people tried to figure out some other means of exchange. And that is, in fact, something that we may actually see here, because confidence in the dollar is collapsing. It did originally, not originally, I guess is the wrong way to say it, but throughout a large portion of the history of the United States, the dollar has been convertible into gold and silver, and the Treasury had gold and silver in its vaults to some extent. It was always only a fraction of the amount of money floating around, but there was always something to peg it to. And then in the last 100 years, that has been changed. First, you had basically going off the national gold standard in the 30s when the government went bankrupt because it owed so much money to the Federal Reserve, which is a private banking institution, and other banks throughout the world. So what happened during the 1930s was actually all that gold, as well as gold that other people in America had in their possession, was all called in and handed over to these international banks. And a lot of people aren't aware that also their property was actually hypothecated, was put forward as collateral for future loans. So that, because hopefully I can stick this in before the end of the show here, but people need to understand that, the money is created out of nothing, but it's not free. The government the government is buying this stuff. That's what makes it so offensive. It's kind of funny the way the fiat currency is cute and funny, and I don't think it's necessarily an evil thing. The magic is real to a certain extent, I think. But when you have the system that we have now, where the private institution, the Federal Reserve, creates this
talisman, this piece of paper that represents gold. They create it out of nothing. And then what do? They sell it to our government.
Right.
We have to buy these things.
And then we pay interest on it.
So that, so it's too complicated to explain right now. That is where our national debt comes from. That it's because of the money being created out of nothing and then sold to us that we have a national debt, and it is unpayable. Every time a dollar is created, think about this, a debt is created in your name by your government to international bankers. So they talk about increasing the money supply. You may think, oh, that's great. I don't have enough money. I need some money. Well, that's what it means is that they're taking the money that you have in your wallet and making each one of those dollars worth less by producing more. And they're also putting you and your children and all of your descendants on the hook for exponentially more money, because as time goes on, that debt will just keep snowballing, and that's what's been happening. We've had so much debt, and of course, with compound interest, when you have interest on top of debt, and that interest becomes part of the debt, and then you calculate your future interest payments based on that as well. It's like it exponentially compounds quickly to the point where you or a society that owes a debt could never actually pay it off because it's always getting bigger. And that's why I, in my most recent book, Money Grows on the Tree of Knowledge, really hammered home this idea that this whole ritual sacrifice of the king, where the king eats his own child to prevent himself from being usurped, that's really part of the whole alchemy of the monetary system too, because we've got the engine of commerce being built upon the productivity of future generations. And in fact, not only is their future productivity and wealth being consumed by present generations and ultimately mainly by the government and then the banks that own the government, but you also are potentially preventing those children from even existing because as money is taken out of the economy and channeled towards in these private hands, every person who is made poorer, potentially won't have as many children, or their children may be more likely to die. And so anyway, you have this sacrifice of the future basically embedded in our economic system.
Yes, and
go ahead.
Go ahead, finish.
Well, I just wanted to say that the connection with alchemy is very specific. I didn't just pull this out of my ass. The reason why I had this epiphany, really, where I realized, oh my God, the king sacrifice thing is connected to alchemy, and that's connected to the financial system. It was when I was reading this book called The Mystery of the Cathedrals by Fulcanelli, a famous alchemist, and I just finally realized that, oh, wow, all the symbolism in the alchemical process, a lot of it is about Saturn eating his children. And in fact, one of the most famous alchemists, Nicholas Flamel, used to, his book, the Book of Abraham the Jew, which is this alchemical allegory, it's all about that. I mean, he specifically has all these images of Saturn eating his own children, and it talks about that the child is basically like the philosophical Mercury.
Yes.
That dies and then is reborn as the gold. So
I liked your explication. I liked your explication of Flamel in your book, and the treatise you're talking about. It really opened my eyes to a lot of things. The way you explained what was going on there.
It opened my eyes. I got to tell you, I only really started seeing all this stuff about last year when I started writing it, and that's when I just sort of realized, oh my God, all of this specifically child eating and sacrificing stuff is at the heart of all of our social institutions and all of these rituals that we go through. I guess I just realized that that's like the primordial religious ritual, really, is the god king or queen sacrificing her child. That's what religion is really all about, is child sacrifice. And then I found some other people who agreed with me once I started, researching this. Like there's this guy, Lloyd DeMause, who wrote a great book about, it's called The Origin of War in Child Abuse. So it's all about the ancient world and how, children were abused as a part of daily life, and in fact social institutions were built upon the abuse of children and the sacrifice of children. And then he basically comes out and says that the whole ancient world was built upon rituals of child sacrifice.
And of course, the alchemical thing is very explicit there when it comes to our economy, with the sacrifice of future generations for the betterment of today, for the conversion of lead into gold. Now we sacrifice children of the future. One thing that you did mention that I wanted to say. Putting something in the place like we have with the Federal Reserve and with other central banks which issue currency for a nation, as you said, there's nothing inherently wrong with the fiat currency. What is the horror, as much as the child sacrifice and the blood ritual and all of this stuff and its connection to alchemy and the alchemical connection to the economy. What is the horror is that the fiat currency that we have is bought and paid for by interest. We could have a much better system simply if a government just issued credit by themselves without the intervention of an interest payment scheme through a central bank of international bankers. I think that would be infinitely superior to what we have today with the fiat currency being issued by the Federal Reserve and having to pay them back interest on what money we get, which is just ludicrous. It's ludicrous if you think about it. I mean, it just doesn't even make any sense. I mean, who came up with this idea? Somebody who wanted to get rich, of course, because all it ends up doing is ensuring that the vast majority of resources of a particular nation end up going to servicing the debt created by the people who make the money and give it over to the government to introduce into circulation, which, if I was on the receiving end of that contract, being the government, I'd be like, what the hell am I getting out of this? Because all I'm going to end up doing is being way more in debt than I am now.
But the government is made up of individuals
Indeed.
who just want to have their job, and
Absolutely.
they're bought off by the corporations that own the government.
That's why we have
who came up with this was at the end of World War II. You had the Bretton Woods Conference, international conference, where the victors in World War II, Britain and the United States, basically shoved down the throats of all the rest of the world this international monetary system. And you had all of Europe totally destroyed by World War II, so they were not in any position to argue. They all needed loans in order to rebuild themselves, and so the United States was in the position to make those loans, created this institution called the International Monetary Fund.
Oh boy, don't even get me started on them.
I don't want to again, this is something I could go on and on about, but just basically to sketch it out for you people, this whole fiat currency scheme that we've been describing, where money is created out of nothing by a private bank and then sold to a government, and people of that country are indebted because of it. Well, that was extended globally when the international monetary system was created during Bretton Woods. And originally, the dollar was convertible into gold in the system. What it was the dollar became the reserve currency. All the other countries would have to hold dollars in their central bank to back up their currencies, right? Instead of gold, they would have dollars. And then supposedly they could transfer those dollars into gold at any time. They could take them to the Treasury Department, and they would take some gold out of Fort Knox supposedly and hand it over to the foreign government in exchange for the paper dollars, if they ever felt the need to divest of the paper dollars and get more gold. Well, what ended up happening was they did that. As the Federal Reserve kept printing more money and making the bonds associated with the dollars worth less and convertible into less gold, the holders of those bonds were anxious to convert it into gold fast before it lost value over time. And so we ended up having our treasury raided by all these foreign central banks converting their dollars into gold. And it culminated in 1971 when Richard Nixon just decided unilaterally he was going to break the Bretton Woods system overnight. And he just made this speech the next morning and said, we're no longer converting dollars into gold. And so now you have this whole system is just floating on faith. You can never convert dollars into anything, but all these other countries have them, and they're forced to hold them as their reserve currency. So one of the interesting things, and I'll just make this very brief, is to look through history and current events and see what countries aren't part of the international currency system, what countries are printing their own money with the power of their own government and not paying an international cartel for the privilege of it, and then see what happens to those countries. And one by one, they all get invaded by the United States.
Absolutely. And what the international monetary system right now, especially with the International Monetary Fund, is nothing but a corporate syndicate, basically, which goes about privatizing every country that it loans money to and enriching the corporate oligarchy that runs everything behind the scenes, and even more so right out in the open today, which is one of the most egregious things that's going on today, which is just the in-your-face attitude of these people, which really gets on my nerves. But we only have a couple minutes left, so I want to give you a chance to plug your websites again, Tracy, and
sure.
Tell the people about your books, and just go ahead.
Okay, yeah, the website's libertycappress.com, also tracytwyman.com or tracyr.twyman.com, and then the bookstore, the online bookstore, is quintessentialpublications.com. If you have trouble spelling any of those things, you can always just Google my name, Tracy Twyman. I think you can figure out how to spell Liberty Cap, C-A-P, libertycappress.com. If you go to any of these websites, you'll find the other websites and all the information that we've been talking about, and you can find all of the books that I've written for sale there, and there's a whole bunch of them. I would recommend highly Money Grows on the Tree of Knowledge, Solomon's Treasure, and the Merovingian Mythos, which goes into the royal bloodlines. And then we have this new one out called Antichrist 2012, coming out on May 2nd. You can pre-order it, and it's all about Prince William and the royal wedding and the upcoming coronation and all that symbolism.
I'll be all over that one. I can highly recommend the Lovecraft book too, because it does have a direct bearing to this whole idea of Saturn and the sleeping god and everything else. And then we mustn't forget as well, just to mention very briefly, that there is the idea of the once and future king, which is represented by Arthur. And I think it was you who said in one of your recent articles that the king is able to choose whatever name he wants. And, of course, William and Charles both have Arthur in their names. So it could be the return of the once and future king as well, who is rumored to be asleep in some place, not dead but not alive either, and who will come again one day to bring back the golden age of time for Britain as well. So they have their own take on that particular mythology as well. I think it's perhaps a good point for us to end the show right there with the idea of that. So hopefully encourage people to pick up some of your work and have a read, because it is very good. It's very well explained, and you're a very proficient writer, and I think you have a very good insight into the topics that you bring out. Tracy, I'm very glad to have you on the show today, and hopefully I'll have you again in the future, and we'll talk about some more of these themes a little more in depth. It seems like 2 hours just isn't enough to even scratch the surface, but I want to thank you for being with us today, Tracy Twyman, and
thank you.
I'll bid you a good evening, and we'll have you again on the future, okay?
All right. Yeah, you have a good evening, too. Thank you so much.
All right. Good night.
Bye.
Okay, so anyway, Tracy R. Twyman, TracyRTwyman.com, QuintessentialPublications.com, LibertyCapPress.com. And you can find works she's written on her websites, and you can find her books there as well. Highly recommended. Join me again next week, same time, same place, for another episode of the Stench of Truth Radio. Goodbye.